Thank you everyone for joining us this evening. I am Becca Gulliver, the Saginaw Valley Regional Manager for Michigan Farm Bureau. I am part of our Farm Stress team at Farm Bureau and very excited to join you all this evening. Since starting in this role about 3.5 years ago, this has been a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. After attending my first Saginaw County board meeting and a member surfacing the issue. They kicked off their Farm Stress Alertness Committee, and from there, this really started the conversation, which is part of what has led us to where we are today. We kicked off this Farmers After Hours series with a farmer panel, and leading up to this point, we have hosted 5 mini sessions on different components in managing farm stress. This evening, we have each of the experts who facilitated these sessions joining us for this panel conversation. To start us out, each panelist will introduce themselves in voluntary order and share their background and experience with farm stress, mental health. Sarah, would you like to get us started?
Absolutely. Thanks so much, you guys, for being here today. My name is Sarah Zastro, and I grew up on a farm. I am married to a farmer. I'm the vice president for Midland County Farm Bureau, and I'm also the founder of Cultivate Balance and the Cultivate with Sarah Zastro podcast. What I do is teach people how to manage stress and teach people practical, easy to apply things that they can do every day to make sure that their stress level stays low, their mental health stays in check, and which really helps with health and happiness. A big portion of what I do is work with farmers. So obviously, after growing up on a farm and learning all kinds of habits, both good and bad, for how to manage stress, I decided that I could help people with this. So after my husband and I started farming, I decided that I really wanted to dive deep into the topic of farm stress and farm mental health. And so now what I do is a lot of work with social media, a lot of work with podcasting and video and blogging to help people and give people the practical everyday tools that they can use on their farm to just make sure that their stress stays in check, that those bad days don't turn into bad weeks and bad months, and that everybody is staying happy and healthy on their farm. A lot of it has to do with perspective and some mindset work, as well as easy to apply habits every day that make a big difference.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and jump on up after Sarah. My name is Adrienne D. Sutter. Professionally, I am a former school counselor, so I've got an education background in mental health, and I married a 4th-generation farmer. Here in Illinois, we grow corn and soybeans. We have a small herd of cattle and a small herd of children, so we're just all over the place. That's sort of my professional role, but what I think one of the biggest problems in agriculture is that we really define ourselves entirely with our profession of farming, and so I think it's important for us also to recognize that we are more than just our profession. You know, this is our lifestyle, and we love many parts of agriculture. It's a beautiful thing, but we also want to recognize who we are outside of that and make sure that we know what our identity is personally as well. So personally, I became an ag mental health advocate in 2018 when we lost a family friend to suicide, and my husband and I were going through a lot of farm stress as well, and felt like we wanted to make sure that that was not a path that we ever went down, and that we were able to gain control. And so we made a lot of changes and began advocating, because we know that suicide is preventable, and we know that that there are things that we can do, and we wanted to really lead that ship. So now I am involved in social media, and also giving presentations, and just really helping farm families learn how not just to survive, but to learn how to thrive.
I'll jump next, if that's okay. I want to know how many herds of kids you have. Is it easier to raise the kids or the cattle?
Honestly, neither.
So I'm Barb Smith, and I actually started my partnership with Farm Bureau about probably 3 or 4 years ago when they reached out to myself to do some trainings. I Our network is the Barb Smith Suicide Resource and Response Network. And what that means is we present trainings, education, awareness for specific to suicide, but also to help people understand the importance of reaching out and getting help. So our network offers prevention efforts and trainings, but we also are there in the aftermath of completed suicide. So, you know, my hope is to do much more in the prevention part, so we have to do less in the post-care. But I'm here as a resource mostly, and what I do is we connect people. So because I speak statewide, nationwide, I have the opportunity to meet a lot of people. And because I'm comfortable talking about suicide and most people aren't, oftentimes people call me afterwards or email to say, look, I have a family member, a friend, or myself, and I'm really struggling. Can you just guide me? So thus our name is called The Network. And our job is to help support you immediately, but also to connect you to resources. So I'm very honored and proud to be part of the farming community now as welcome. I've never been part of the community, but I can tell you it's an honor to meet the most amazing, hardworking people. And I say that, I do say that, and I don't say every group I speak with, but you are the most hardworking, honest people that I feel never got the respect from people in the general population. So my hope is that we can get back to you now, we can start the dialogue and start hearing people who care for us. So thank you.
And I guess I'm wrapping up the intros. My name is Kylie Rimanowicz, and I'm an extension educator with Michigan State University Extension. I like to start with full disclosure. I'm not a farmer, and I don't come from a farming family. But my connection to the farming community is definitely extension, which is so closely tied to farming, not in just in Michigan, but in every state where there's a cooperative extension service. My area of expertise is actually early childhood development. I do a lot of parenting education. I work with all sorts of families. And a big part of early childhood education and my specialty is really social emotional health, which is the foundation for every other part of health and every other part of learning. And that has really sparked for me like my own personal journey in mental health and mindfulness. I had anxiety. I've had anxiety my whole life, an anxiety disorder. I didn't know what it was until I was like 22, and I had a massive panic attack. They finally gave me words for all of the terrible things I've been feeling since I was like 4. And I was like, oh, that is a thing that I experience. And while it's not fun, that's normal for me. It's never going to go away. It's part of who I am. But there are so many things I can do to learn how to cope and learn how to manage. And so for me, mindfulness has been instrumental in finding ways to live my daily life in a way that's healthier and more balanced. So that can be really formal, like going to a meditation class or going to a yoga class, but sometimes it's just laying on the floor in my apartment and staring at the ceiling for a couple of minutes, or giving myself permission to walk outside, which I do frequently now that I work at home, and home is work and work is home, and it never goes away. Sometimes I just walk out the front door right there and I just stand outside for a couple minutes. That's really the act of mindfulness. And being that has been so transformative for my life, it's something I really try to share through my work with families and communities, because I know that small, simple changes that might seem overwhelming on the front end can really make a huge difference for your mental health and for your quality of life.
Thank you all. And Kylie, I think my dog got sick of walks while I was stuck at home working, so I understand that. At this time, each panelist is going to give a brief summary of the top tools and takeaways that they shared in their sessions prior to us taking questions from the audience. Please note, the questions asked will remain anonymous, and I encourage you all to take some time to use the question and answer box on the right side of your screen to ask your questions. Sarah, would you like to go ahead and get us started again with your session summary?
Absolutely. I did 2 sessions. The first was exercise, and the second was doing a daily gratitude practice. So first and foremost, with exercise, we all know that exercise is good for us. Now, there's kind of 2 groups of people here, because one time I got a little bit too big-headed, and I bet my husband that I got more steps in a day than he did, and he stuck it to me, okay? I had 20,000 steps in a day, which I thought was rocking it, and he had 40,000 by noon. So the fact of the matter is, some farmers, people who live and work, they're in the trenches, they get enough exercise, they have enough activity, they're moving all the time. And I can tell you that farmers are strong. They are constantly lifting and doing different things with their bodies. They get enough exercise. And then there's people who don't, right? For whatever reason. Maybe you don't spend as much time on the farm. Maybe your role is a little bit more administrative, or maybe you're working in agriculture in a different capacity. So whatever the reason is, if you get enough exercise, if you're one of those people who has a super active job, great, good for you. What you don't get in that position or in that role are the benefits of exercise, because you don't take the time to flex your muscles in the mirror, take a selfie like they do at the gym, okay? So what that means is that you don't get quite the rush of endorphins that you would if you were taking selfies at the gym, okay? So an easy shift that farmers who get plenty of exercise, plenty of activity, an easy thing that you can do, we call the farmer's runner's high. And what you do after you have done something active, after you broke a sweat, okay? Now, maybe you were changing field cultivator shovels. Maybe you were pounding rocks out of a piece of equipment. Maybe you were just climbing up and down the ladder, right? Baling hay, breaking down a tire. Take a minute and say, yeah, I did a good job. I am proud of my body. I am strong, right? When we get hot, when we get sweaty, that is physical activity. But if we never take the minute to say, hey, that was really good. I am proud of what my body can do. I am grateful for the opportunity to do this, then we don't get the benefits, okay? So take a minute. You don't have to take a selfie. You can if you want to. A lot of people do, right? But take a minute and appreciate what your body has done for you. Now, if you're in the other position, right? I work in agriculture, but I also sit at a desk a lot and I don't actually get that much activity in my day. Then it's important to make sure to make it a priority to exercise. And the reason being, we know that there's tons and tons and tons of benefits, both mentally, emotionally, psychologically, socially, to exercise, but we need to actually do it. What I do is use my exercise as an afternoon break, okay? I always say I exercise for the people in my life, not for me, because I can tell you I'm a lot more patient, I'm a lot more pleasant to be around, I'm a lot more grateful of the people around me if I have that chance to exercise. So really quick, what I do every day between 2 and 3 o'clock, I exercise. It gives me a break from my day, helps to reset my posture, reset my body, hikes up my energy level, and it helps me take a break between the stress of work, right, which never actually ends, and the stress of home. I exercise for those people around me so that I don't accidentally bite my husband's head off, right? Anyone else? No, you don't have to answer that, okay? But it's really, really important for our bodies and the people around us to exercise every day. The second session that I did was a daily gratitude practice. As farmers, the same things that we're glad we have as farmers, we're glad we do, glad are involved, or that we're glad are incorporated in farming, are also the things that stress us out. Now, let me explain. One thing that I love about farming is that I get to learn from my parents and my grandparents and my husband's parents and grandparents, and we get to teach our children these valuable lifelong lessons that are passed down generation to generation. Now, I also hate that, okay? It drives me crazy being on a farm, right? Sometimes I just need space. I need some girl time. And the last thing I want to do is listen to my dad tell me that lesson one more time. I'm over it. I'm done with it. I am walking away. Okay, I'll give you another example. I am so glad that I do not have to work in an office. It's so nice that I can be outside underneath the big sky in the weather, and I do something different every day, and I'm constantly being able to evolve and improve my life and my day. I also hate breakdowns, right? I hate the chance that I have to work in the rain all the time. I hate the mud and pulling out tractors and pulling out trucks and getting the grain cart stuck. I hate all those things. So it's good that every day is a little bit different. It's good that I get the chance to problem solve until I don't like that so much. Okay, so there's so many things about farming that is changed by our perspective. And the way that you can improve your perspective just a little bit is by doing a daily gratitude practice. So the simplest, easiest way to do this is to bring up around the dinner table, and whether the dinner table is a tailgate or the dinner table is an actual table, it's important to say, hey, what's good today? What are some of those bright spots? Outline a couple of good things that happened every day. Now, bonus points, major bonus points here if you write those things down. I'm a person, I like to journal. I journal what I did that day. Sometimes I journal what the rain was, what the weather was. Those family issues that I talked about, I just journal it out, right? But if I write down 3 good things, or I call them bright spots, that happened yesterday, it really, really helps to do 2 things. Number 1, it releases serotonin and dopamine in my brain. Now, I do this first thing in the morning when my coffee is brewing, okay? So that takes a minute or 2. I just take those 2 minutes and write down 3 good things that happened yesterday. So it releases serotonin and dopamine in my brain. The other thing that it does is inadvertently teaches me to search for things because I know I'm going to have to write those things down tomorrow. Okay. So option number 1, just bring up, hey, what's good? Tell me what's good about your day. It's interesting the things that your kids will say. It's interesting the things that your sullen teenagers that are angry and just texting all the time. It's interesting what they'll say. It's interesting what your spouse will say. Bring up those conversations. Make it a habit as a family to talk about the good. Okay. And then bonus points, write it down, spend some time with yourself, and really make it a good habit, a part of every day.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and jump in then. I love all of those wonderful tips, Sarah. Those are things that I talk about all the time when I'm working with farm groups, and so I totally nailed it. And what I love is how practical it is, because this is all stuff, you know. A lot of times when it comes to being healthy as busy farmers, we are all busy farm families, and so we neglect ourselves, right? We spend all our time taking care of our equipment, taking care of our tools. Some of us taking care of those fields and our cattle and, you know, all of our livestock and things, but we are the last people to take care of ourselves. And so we need some of these quick practical things to remind us, you know, how do we do that? How do we take care of ourselves and prioritize ourselves? Because if we're not functioning, our farms aren't functioning. I mean, that's just the reality. So one of what I talked about in our session was positive self-talk, and I heard Sarah mention a lot of those things, really, because it's a fancy word, positive self-talk, but really what we're talking about is the way you talk to yourself, that inner voice that you have going on throughout the day, that's either being negative or that's being positive. That's being realistic or is exaggerating things, you know. There's a kind of a spectrum of things that we think about all day long, all throughout the day, and there's a couple takeaways, I think, when it comes to positive self-talk or making that voice in your brain help you rather than hurt you. And the first one is allowing yourselves to have crappy moments. It's okay in your mind to say, well, this sucks, right? It's okay to say, man, I really wish it would rain right now, or man, I really wish it would stop raining right now. I mean, we know that that's okay. That's okay to have those thoughts. I think something that farmers do, and especially men do, is when bad things are happening, we cover it up, or we bury that, or we distract ourselves on something else that's just work to take our mind off of that negative stuff that's happening. And when we do that, we just bury it down and dig a hole deeper and deeper that at some point we blow up, right? I mean, we know that happens. So if we can acknowledge and just take moments to say, this is tough, this is difficult, this is hard, that's okay. That helps us to kind of even it out so it doesn't blow up. one of the things Sarah was mentioning is you can love something and not love something at the same time, right? I mean, that's okay. That's the word we like to use is and. It's okay to love something and hate something, right? So we have to remember that it's okay to have negative thoughts as long as we also have that and I know it's going to get better later, or and we're going to feel a different way about this tomorrow. My daughter's screaming.
That's the word you're talking about.
Working from home, right? We love it and we hate it. They were taking a tractor ride. I thought they were going to make it the whole time, but that's how it goes, right? Farm life. The second one I think is very appropriate to mention. Not only are we going to allow ourselves to have those moments, as long as we allow ourselves to have the negative, as long as we can also maintain hope. I know that things are awful now, or that things feel bad now, and I know that they're going to get better. Right? We maintain that hope. We maintain that idea that maybe this is awful, but I'm not hopeless. I'm not worthless. Right? I think those are important things to remember. So we also want to then talk to ourselves like we would talk to a loved one. Okay. My sweet screaming daughter, if she comes to me in 10 years and she talks about how she woke up really early in the morning and she, went to school and worked really hard and, went to practice and came home, but she still had all these other things to do and she feels so defeated. What am I going to tell her? Right? Am I going to tell her, well, since you didn't check anything off your to-do list, I guess you're a failure. Right? Well, no, we're not going to do that, right? Same thing goes on the farm. My husband came home one day and just felt so defeated because he had woken up so early, but with all the breakdowns, with all the weather problems that he had, and with the cows getting loose and things like that, you just feel defeated some days. And it's okay to have those feelings of defeat, but then you have to go and talk to yourself, that those voices in your brain that you have control over. You talk to yourself how you would a loved one. What would you say to your son or your daughter, or an uncle or a grandpa who's really struggling, or an aunt, or your mother, whoever. We don't defeat other people. We don't beat people down. And so we need to think about, how would we talk to those people under that situation? We would say, you know what, you tried really hard. We would say, you worked hard all day long, which means you're still farther along than you would have been yesterday, or had you not done any of those things. We're using rational thought and thinking, what type of advice would I give a friend or a loved one? And I think if you can do a couple of those tips and get used to doing those things, and having that type of self-talk, it's really going to help you. I think it's important to practice it on your off seasons and your less stressful seasons, definitely, because once we get in the habit of positive self-talk, it's going to come easier to us when we're in the midst of stressful harvest or planting or baling or whatever season you're in. So good luck.
So I could, on mine, my talk that I had done was really about how to recognize when someone might be in that space of suicide or depression. So I talked about a lot of the symptoms, a lot of behaviors that someone might exhibit. So I can just run through very quickly what some of those were, and then we can discuss how do you recognize it. So really, someone who has more poor physical health, they're sick more often than previous. They stop taking care of their farm or their livestock. More injuries due to fatigue, lack of concentration, irritability, agitation, loss of temper. I mean, here's a person who's always been calm, just never let things get to them, and all of a sudden they're just flying off the handle real quick. Problem sleeping, weight gain or weight loss, anxiety. And we have talked about that a little bit earlier. It's like even when things are calm, you're anxious because what if, right? We're always waiting for the next thing. And feeling very distressed often, and change in routine. And you think or you hear someone, or someone starts to think about, my family would be better off without me. So when those thoughts start to come into your mind about weighing out, what would it be like if I was dead? Is it better for them? Is it better for me? That's really a sign. If your family notices more behavior, and oftentimes they notice it more than you do. because we internalize things, but when by the time the family and friends recognize it, it's starting to show on the outside. It's a lot harder to mask. So if family members recognize these and or your friends, because you're in such a rural area, reality is it's your family, friends, and your coworkers or your work people in the work field that know you the best. They are the ones that are going to be able to recognize, what's going on. And families, I think, try to deny it. Oh, it's just because of the farming. It's just because of financial. We start to make excuses and not really recognize this really could be some type of a depression or anxiety coming on. And I think in the farming community, like you said, you're just very tough people, very strong, very independent. And that gets us in trouble sometimes when we're afraid to ask for help. And, if you don't want to say, I want to ask for help, I just need added support. I need to do maintenance, just like I would on my farming equipment. Just simply put, we wouldn't let your farming equipment go without maintaining it in off season. Why don't we do that for ourselves? If you want a quality of life and productivity, it's really about just maintenance on yourself. There's nothing wrong in asking for help, but also as a friend, don't be afraid to let your friend notice that something is going on. So a behavior change is more number one than really going through the checklist. And your instinct. If you think something's wrong with someone, just ask. If someone's having a heart attack, you wouldn't deny it. You'd be like, what's going on with you? I notice you're sweating, you're kind of grabbing the chest, maybe some numbness is going on. You would address a health situation. And it's life or death, just like a heart attack. We don't want to deny that there could be potential, and we don't want to wait till it is suicide. We just want to start that conversation when you have a concern that someone is changing and it just doesn't feel right and it doesn't seem right. A good friend does not let a person go because we're afraid to intrude. A good friend really says, what, I noticed there's a lot going on with you and I just want to sit with you.
All right. So again, I'm Kylie, and my session was on meditation and focus. And so I'm actually going to start my little recap by having us do a mindfulness activity together, and hopefully my fellow panelists will join me. The good news for all of you is that I work in early childhood, so I don't mind looking silly in front of lots of people. So we're going to do a technique that's really fun for kids, but also is one that I use a lot as an adult. It's called dragon breathing. So basically what we're going to do is take a big deep breath in our nose, and I'll demonstrate once and then we'll do it together. So a deep breath in your nose. And when you breathe out, you're going to open your mouth wide and you're going to restrict the air in your throat a little bit, kind of like you're fogging up a bathroom mirror. So it's going to look like this. And you're going to hear kind of a ha as you do it, like you're sighing. We're going to take 3 deep dragon breaths together, breathing in through our nose and sighing out. And in through our nose and out. And now your deepest breath yet, in through your nose. And push all that air out. And pause just where you are, just for a second, and notice what your body feels like right now. Just pausing, slowing down, right, can shift how we're feeling physically and mentally. And yet, that is really hard to do. I am a super type A person. I have been described as intense. I have been described as high strung. I have been described as kind of a lot, and I am kind of a lot. And I think in many ways that's a good thing. And I think farmers operate the same way, right? I call it full throttle Kylie. That's who I am. Like, if there's a task to be done, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it right. And I'm going to do it now, right? Pausing, slowing down is terrifying to me. That goes like against my nature as a human. I feel like it just goes against how I'm wired. Pausing is terrifying. But I find that I get into this loop of like, well, I can't stop. I have to do it. It has to get done. I can't stop. If I stop, it's not going to get done. And I get into this sort of this mental loop, right? Over and over again. I can't do it. I can't do it. I can't do it. And the more I get into this tunnel, the scarier it is to think about pausing for a minute, just a minute even, slowing down, taking a breath, trying to recenter. But every time I do, I always feel better. I never regret it. I never go, oh, I'm really sad I took that 3 minutes to take a couple of deep breaths or to walk away when I was really frustrated. But I understand how challenging it is to get into that mindset of giving yourself permission and space to be human. We sometimes forget that we're human. I have a friend who's got a 6-year-old son, and he did something silly one day, and his dad got really irritated and yelled at him. And his son said, Dad, I'm really sorry. I've never been a kid before. And isn't that simultaneously the most adorable and heartbreaking thing you've ever heard? He doesn't know how to be a kid. He's still learning. And in so many ways, we don't know how to be people. We're still learning too every day, even though we're adults, even though we've been on the earth a lot longer than that 6-year-old kid, we're still learning how to be adults too. And I think giving ourselves permission and space to pause, especially when things are overwhelming, that should be a note for us, like, ooh, I'm noticing, this is what I use a little phrase for myself. I'm noticing that I'm kind of spiraling right now. Like I'm sweating a bit, my heart rate is increasing. I can't focus because I have these like thoughts that are kind of circular. That for me is that I notice I'm really struggling right now. I know that I need to take a break, whatever that might be. And that break doesn't need to be an hour. I think sometimes we get into this thought of the way mindfulness is portrayed in the world is it's this very fancy formal thing. Like you have your special meditation costed $80 and you have your special yoga clothes and you have candles and incense, and that could be meditation, but all meditation is me sitting with my cat on my lap purring and just petting her for a couple of minutes and taking a break from my email. That's meditation too. It doesn't need to be this formal fancy thing. It could be pausing exactly where you are just for a minute or two to center yourself. And what's really important to note is that what centers you is going to be really different from what centers me. And you have to find the techniques that work best for you. So for me, nature is a huge part of my mental health wellness plan. When quarantine started, I was really struggling to live alone. I was now working at home. I had zero social contact at all. And I was having a really hard time. And then I was like, okay, you need to go outside. And the second I stepped into the woods, 5 feet into the woods, I felt like, oh God, I can breathe again. Like that, just being out in the woods for me, that's an act of mindfulness. No phone, no music, nobody else around, just me and nature taking a couple of deep breaths. And it's also an opportunity to practice some of the other great skills that my fellow panelists have been talking about, like some self-talk, digesting what's happening, some gratitude, like taking those moments to pause seems so counterintuitive, especially when you're incredibly stressed. And you are worth the pause. You know, Adrienne mentioned talking to yourself like you talk to other people. And I encourage you, I do a thing where I have a picture on my wall of myself when I was about 5. And I look at that picture and I say to myself, what would you do to 5-year-old you who was stressed out and overwhelmed and losing it right now? Would you tell her to keep going, to keep pushing, to power through? Or would you say, whoa, you need a break? And I can tell you, my parents were practicing mindfulness with me before anybody knew what it was, because I would have panic attacks as a kid and they didn't tell me to suck it up and push through. They were like, whoa, let's remove you from what's happening. Let's take some deep breaths. Let's get ourselves situated before we move back to the problem at hand. So I want you to think about yourself as a kid, how you would treat yourself when you were 5 or 6, how you would treat a kid who doesn't know how to be a kid yet. Just the same way, treat yourself like you don't know how to be a human yet, because you're still learning too. We're all still learning. But mindfulness and meditation can happen anywhere, anytime. And there are so many ways to find that work really well for you.
Thank you all. Kylie, I'm happy you brought up positive self-talk again, because the first question that we had came in actually deals with positive self-talk. So for all of the panelists, what if you see people you love struggling with not so positive self-talk? How do you help them? How do you help your kids still develop a positive inner voice?
Well, just because I talked positive self-talk, I'll jump in first here, and then whoever else wants to join, it would be great. if you are noticing in someone else that they're struggling, any of those things that Beth listed, any of those signs and symptoms, or really just noticing that someone seems off, someone seems different, that's one thing I think is important. There is no perfect warning sign, list. Everybody is just different, and the way that we the first thing we need to do is know what is normal for me, what is normal for my spouse, my children, my loved ones, the people I'm around, what is their normal. And then when you see that deviation, that's when you kind of go, okay, something's off. So when it comes to not so positive self-talk, that is something that we definitely see in my home personally, and something that my husband and I work on with each other. And so for us, I used to be really stuck on fixing things and saying, well, that's not true, right? Well, let's think rationally. Let's look at that in a different way. And that helped my husband zero. Because when we're going through that, there is our brain, actually the parts of our brain that deal with logic and rationality and reason, going through stress damages those parts of our brain, essentially, so they don't function the way that we need them to. So trying to say, well, just think logically, just be positive, those types of comments are sometimes just very minimizing, and they just don't really work. So I think the first step really is just listening and supporting and showing empathy. I may not know what your day was like. My husband's name is Drew. I may not know what your day was like, Drew, but I know that you came home today and you are really stressed, and I'm sorry it was difficult. If you want to talk about it, I'm here. And then I'm going to actively listen, okay? I'm going to use eye contact. I'm going to nod and show that I'm listening. I'm going to ask questions about what it is that he's talking about so that I can better understand. I don't have to have walked through his shoes to understand that he's hurting. And so my job is to just help him know that I'm listening, that I care, that I'm here to help him through it. I'm going to support him and really validate those concerns and say, yeah, that does sound difficult, but we're going to get through it too. And so, when a person is ready to move on, then we can work on the problem solving, and we can work on, well, when did this happen last in your life? Have you had moments like this before? Well, what did you do to solve them? Those are just some techniques that you can use. But I think when it comes to general, the way we support each other as loved ones, as friends and family, is really just not making someone feel silly or wrong for having a feeling that is negative. It's saying, that's okay. It's okay to have those negative feelings, and I'm here to work through that with you.
I have to, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I guess that I want to really echo that. That's one of our biggest challenges. So someone's computer's really slow. I think one of the biggest problems that we all do try, and I guess not a problem, but we all want to fix people. So when someone's saying, I can't do this anymore, and the stress that I have, I can't keep up. Well, yes, you can. Don't worry about it. You're going to do this. Like, we pat people on the back. And I have to agree, we minimize where they're at. We don't have to feed into it, but we have to validate where they're at, help them feel understood, and then come back with, okay, so this is really hard. How can I help you? Instead of, you need to do this. And I think we really dismiss the amount of pressure people have, and especially people who aren't used to sharing and disclosing. Then all of a sudden they're finally saying, I'm done. And then we turn it around like, you can't be done, like, you need to do this. It's not helpful to put more pressure on someone. But when someone says, I'm done, I'm just going to kill it myself. I mean, people say that a lot, even kids. Instead of saying, why would you do that? Why would you say that? Just say, so why today? What made you say that today? And then just, I'm not a therapist, so I can just say, then just shut up and listen. I can just say that. The key thing is just shut up and listen. People don't want to be talked at, they just want to be heard. And once they take all that stress out, they already start to feel the relief without you even trying to help them or fix them. Once they release the pressure, you're going to see a little decrease even in their body language. So it doesn't sound like a lot of work, because it's not. And probably the less you say, the better you sound.
When it comes to helping children develop this positive self-talk, one of the most important things that you can do as an adult is to model it. Because even if you're great at this, so maybe you're really good at it, maybe you're still learning it, we do it internally, we don't do it out loud, right? Unless you're like me, I live alone, I talk to myself all the time. Mostly you're probably doing it in your head. So what you need to do is do it out loud. So you need to say out loud, woo, I was sure the dinner was going to be a disaster because I was going to burn the chicken. I just did not think it was going to work. But you know what? This chicken is delicious. I'm a great cook and a good problem solver. That might seem a little like conceited and vain, right? But children need to see the self-talk in order to know that that's a thing they should be doing too. And then my second trick for you is when you're noticing something positive in your child. So when they're struggling with their math homework, but they work really hard and they get it completed, say to them, wow, you are so persistent. And then add on to the back of that, how did you get to be that way? It can be really easy to dismiss a compliment from somebody, but when you add this second piece of how did you get to be that way, that gets their wheels spinning a little bit like, oh, I'm persistent. How did I get to be that way? I don't know. And then they're going to go through this thought process like, okay, this is who I am. How did I get to be that way? And that's going to start this cycle of like seeing themselves as being this really persistent person.
I like
Another
sticky
thing.
notes. Right? Sticky notes. So I got this, or I'm strong, I'm going to be okay. Self-talk, and just put it all over your house.
I think that's so vital. And everybody brought up such good points today. One thing that I know I struggle with sometimes is I spiral downward. Adrian talked a little bit about exaggerating in our self-talk. And so one thing that comes across my mind a lot is I am the stupidest person in the world. This is going to be such a disaster. And one thing that actually my mom helped me to see is to play out that scenario. Okay, what if you were the stupidest person in the world? And then you start to sort of role play and work through that situation until it sounds so ridiculous that you just end up laughing, right? I think that we don't, when we're when we're spiraling, right? We're out of control and we don't realize that the things that we're thinking are not even close to reality, right? We're way off in left field. If we can talk through those things, and sometimes you make a plan, like, okay, if this goes completely haywire, if I burn the chicken, I've got a bag of pizza rolls in the oven, sometimes, or in the freezer. You just have to make a plan and work through that process. And sometimes it just helps to say, okay, I know that I think that whatever, this situation is going to be horrible, or I'm the stupidest person in the world. In reality, though, I'm not. I can always make a plan, and it really just helps, though, to talk through those things.
So you could say, what's the worst thing that could happen? What's the best thing that can happen? And what's the most likely? And A, and B, and C.
Sometimes I'll use the phrase for myself. The story I'm telling myself right now is I'm the stupidest person in the world, because we tell ourselves these stories that aren't true, right? They're exaggerated to some degree. And that little trigger, like that thought process for me is like, okay, right now, here's what's happening. I'm telling myself a story that I'm very stupid, but that's not the most likely scenario here, right? That's not really what's happening.
You guys all. So how do we work in these behaviors with our spouse without them dismissing us as being hokey?
I'm jumping right in. As soon as I saw that question, I just had to laugh because it is the truth. And we are working with farmers, okay? So these are again, these strong, hardworking, tough, manly people, those of them who are man. And even the women are strong and tough and push through and persevere, right? And I used to joke, I know, I think it was Kylie that mentioned, with yoga and meditation and things, when I started talking about mental health, I would say, I'm not talking about yoga, right? If that works for you, if burning candles works for you, let it be your thing. That's cool. It's not my thing. And it's probably not most farmers' things, right? And so part of like what my identity is when I talk about mental health is, let's just get to the bottom line. Let's just talk about this, you know, throw a couple cuss words in or whatever it is that's going to connect with your spouse or whoever it is. Because the thing is, if you're not real, if you're not being genuine, it is hokey. They do brush it off. I know that when I first started doing mental health presentations, I wanted to talk about the statistics and the signs and giving all that information. And because I thought that they were the most important things and people really needed to know them. But, you know, as someone mentioned, you sit in a group or at a conference or something, and 20 minutes in, you're like, okay, checking the clock. And even if it's interesting, you kind of check out. And so one of the things that I do now when I talk about mental health is use stories and talk about things that are, you know, unfiltered, because that's what makes connections. And when people are connecting, that's when they're listening and that's when they're learning, and that's how you're going to get it out there. So my, you know, just practical suggestion in working with my own spouse is, I'm not going to use the phrase mindfulness. I'm not going to use the phrase meditation. Not that they're bad phrases at all, but that's just not what's going to work for us. If I want him to listen or take a break, take a mindfulness break, walk, whatever, I'm going to say, dude, get out of the house for a little bit, right? I'm going to say it in a way that is comfortable and that is me, because when he hears me giving suggestions that are more me and not, how do you want to talk more about that, in my therapy voice, right? Because that comes out sometimes too. But, you know, however we can make those connections and be real. You don't have to use the vocabulary. You think about that, you know, talk about self-talk. You say, so what's going on up there in the brain right now? You know, whatever it is that is most you, that's the genuine way to help people.
I was going to say the same thing. It's so funny because not only is my husband like, I bring up anything related to even health, wellness, food, like whatever. He's like, boundaries, no thanks. But I think if we can say it in a way that's genuine and that we're not asking them to take this huge step off into left field, but start to bring up those conversations just a normal everyday, take a walk, that's great. Yeah, get out of my hair. I always say that. Like, go to the shop. I don't know, fix something, check something, come back in 20 minutes. But things that sort of meet people where they're at, I think is the best way. And if we can phrase it in a way that's their own language, it's like we're speaking the same language. Because, yeah, meditation, mindfulness, yoga, I teach yoga, and my husband's still like, boop, no thanks. So yeah, meet people where they're at and change the verbiage, I think is brilliant, Adrienne. Yeah.
Sometimes just modeling it, right? Like I'll just put the music on in the house if I need it. I don't say, hey, can you turn on meditation music? It's on when he comes in, right? I probably need it more than he does, but it's on when he comes in, or if he's stressing, it's just like, hey, want to go take a walk to get ice cream? He's not going to just take a walk to exercise. We have a destination, and it's ice cream or something else. So it's really what benefits them. You're right, it's the language, but it's also, you know, I need to take a ride. Let's just go, you know, let's go fishing for a little bit. So if it's not about them, you know, it's, you know, people don't want to feel like a failure or feel like they're weak. And I might be 5 foot tall and I'm not a farming person, but I can tell you, I don't want anybody to ever think that I can't handle something. It's my own issue. But if you just, as a friend, don't ever say, hey, do you need to talk about that? You seem stressed. I'm like, get out of my face. But what you might say is, hey, you want to go take a walk? It's time. I'll do that. So meeting them where they're at, but even something with a question about the kids. I do my grief suicide support group. And I think when you read it, you start to hear it, you start to believe it, and you start to feel it. And it's that self-talk. And I just heard a speaker say, whatever comes out of your mouth goes right back in your ears. So if you do positive messages, and anybody can, I don't care if it's on your laptop, on your phone, but even for your kids, they hear so much negativity, and the pressures from the outside world are coming into our kids. So if there's a lot of stress in your home, put on the music for the kids without asking them. Do something that's peaceful, light the candles without them knowing. It could go through the house, you know. But the notes and the positive energy is what's going to help everybody that lives in that area.
So we talked about some of those barriers when it comes to language. When you guys are all working with farmers, what are the largest barriers to asking for help and then accepting that help?
I know so I do webinars like this often now that we can't be in person anywhere, but for the past couple of years, I've been doing presentations on this type of thing with different ag organizations and even just with small groups of farmers. And I think what the biggest, I guess, issue is that a lot of times when people hear the term mental health, they think about depression and they think about suicide and they think, well, that's not me, so this is not relevant to me and I'm not going to listen to this. And so we need to start understanding that mental health, everyone has that. Everyone has physical health, everyone has mental health. We all have a way that our mind works and the way, we all have feelings, we all have thoughts, we all have actions, and all those things are kind of related to each other. So we all have to kind of understand where we're at. And I think with a lot of people in farm families, not just farmers, not just the people that are out in the fields or working on the equipment, but in those families, the children, people that are working books, whatever, there's always been a lot of stress. There's always been a lot of anxiety. And so for them, I don't think there's a very clear way for them to understand when their stress is more than just stress, because they have a lot of stress. We know that farming is one of the most stressful occupations statistically. So I think that's one of the biggest barriers, is that people think, well, this is the way it's always been. I've always had a lot going on. I've always been busy. I've always been irritable, right? And so that's just the way it is in my home. And I think that one message that I really hope people can grasp is, if that's okay with you and that's the life you want to live, then cool, go for it. Like, that's fine, as long as you feel healthy and in control, as long as you're in control. But also know that just because you've always lived this way doesn't mean that you can't have contentment and you can't have happiness, and you don't have to just survive. You can thrive.
Do you think that gives that person permission, like, to say, I know this isn't you, I've never seen you this way, our workload is still the same, but there's a lot of other barriers going on right now. This isn't because of what you or I did or didn't do. Theirs is just added stress that we never anticipated. I think sometimes, and I'm not stereotyping farming communities, but they're so strong-willed and so insistent that they need to do it alone, that we have to let them know that things are different than they ever were. And it's not an excuse. Life's always been hard. You've always been hard workers. The country has changed, which is causing change in your farming, community, and even everything, the financing, everything is different. So of course you're going to respond differently. It doesn't mean anyone's doing anything right or wrong. It's just the way life is right now. And I think that's valuable too. We can't put the ownership on just the farming community. All the outside sources have been a big challenge. I think the barrier for getting help is pride. I think the insurance that you all have, I was appalled at how much insurance cuts farming communities. Why and how can you stay healthy when you can't get away from your farm for an hour and the cost is so high? Why are we punishing people financially? And I'm not talking about Farm Bureau, I don't know who pays, but I'm saying we have to do better. We have to do better. And I like the Lifeline and the Farm Crisis Center and the Agribility, great resources. We have to make it okay to use, and we have to understand the telepsychiatry is, to me, one of the greatest gifts going on right now. You can do it in the privacy of your own space. It's personable. You've got the eye contact with no distractions. I think we have to promote that more, and it takes less time away from the farm to get the help. The peer-to-peer has absolutely been the best. In my opinion, peer-to-peer is the way to go. I can't walk in your shoes. Even other farmers can't walk in your shoes because we all have different qualities. We all have different life experiences. So farmer to farmer is the most helpful, in my opinion. People who understand. But also that we have to meet your needs instead of us coming to tell you what you should do. How can we help you?
one thing I'm noticing now that COVID is in everybody's lives is that suddenly there's a little bit of a shift toward mental health. And I think if COVID has given us one positive thing, it's that it's suddenly okay to talk about isolation. It's okay to talk about stress, to talk about people struggling, to talk about all these different issues that were maybe a year ago a little bit taboo. They did have a stigma associated with them. And so if we can continue on those conversations, and hopefully in a perfect world, COVID will disappear and life will go on. But if we can continue on the conversation about mental health, about feeling anxious, about struggling, about whatever that looks like for you, we've built that momentum. All we have to do is keep it rolling. And so make it a part of your everyday, make it a part of these conversations. And I think that we'll all be a little better for it.
Yeah, I agree with everything everyone else has said. I feel like there's not much more to say except that addressing mental health is an incredibly vulnerable thing, and vulnerability sucks. Who likes it? You know, the day I went to a therapist for the first time, I was absolutely terrified. I was like, I don't need this. It's fine, right? It's so scary. And there's that big hurdle. I think also addressing mental health goes against our culture as a country in many ways, but also like specifically the culture of farming, right? As people have talked about on this panel, like it goes against sort of the values that we associate with that profession and that lifestyle. And that can be really hard to overcome. But I do agree that I think things are shifting a little bit in COVID times, hopefully. That is an unintended positive outcome of this time.
I agree.
So now that we've overcome those barriers, what is the first step for someone to personally take in their mental health journey?
Well, I can go first again here to go with routine and pattern here. I think, again, kind of going back to that whole idea that we all have to know where we're at. We have to recognize where we are at mentally. That to me looks like, well, knowing my triggers, knowing what it is that is stressful to me. I know for me, when during harvest season, or now we're baling, so we're going from baling season almost right into harvest season in my house. And I have 3 young children, 4, 3, and 2 months. So that's a lot of time of kind of being the only active parent. And I know that is one thing that will be difficult for me. That is a stressor for me when I am the only one doing the hands-on direct parenting for essentially months at a time, because that's what it will be here. And so, what I have to know is, okay, now that we're, getting into these stressful moments in this difficult time, what are some things that I can be doing to put in place? Okay, well, I know that now Wednesdays they're going to Nana's house, right? What else can I do? I know that when I start to get frustrated, I need to walk out to my entryway and shut the door. Whatever it is, I need to be able to recognize what is it that stresses me out? What does that stress look like? So for me, again, I know when my body starts to heat up, when I start to lose patience, when I start to grit my teeth, those are all the things that I know, okay, these are my signs of stress. It's time to take on one of my self-care techniques here, whether that's breathing, whether that's leaving the room, whether it's, whatever it is, taking a shower, any of those things, just knowing where you're at, knowing what stresses you out, and kind of where, being able to monitor that on a daily basis, essentially, to just kind of recognize your patterns. And then, making sure you have resources available, again, whether it's your little self-care things you do, or just, I heard someone say once, we have our people on our farm teams that we call when we need help with equipment, or when something breaks down, or when we need help with whatever it is. It's also a good idea to just have a therapist on your farm team, just to have a number of someone that you have identified that if anyone on your team or in your family is struggling and you get to that point, instead of having to waste time to go look for that help, you already know who that resource is. So those are some things that I would suggest kind of as a starting point.
You're on mute. You're on mute, Sarah.
Okay, is that better? Okay, if you're not sure if getting counseling is something that you need, psychologytoday.com has a little quiz, and they you take the quiz and it can tell you if counseling is something that would be beneficial for you. So I took that quiz. I had a little bit of an issue. I wasn't sure if I needed counseling or if I needed more like coaching or if I needed to suck it up and push on. And so Psychology Today is wonderful. It's free. You can go on there. And then also there's a zip code search. So I could search out counselors in my area. And I work really closely with a counselor. She's on my team. I love her dearly. For this particular like time, season, or whatever, she was super busy and couldn't get me in. And so I did BetterHelp, which was incredible. It's an app that you can use. It's one of those telemedicine type apps. And it was so beneficial because I was able to not go anywhere. I didn't have to do anything. I didn't have to, like stop my life to drive into town to go to counseling. And it was just such a good fit for me. So just know that those two resources are free. BetterHelp is not free, but it is cheaper than regular counseling. And the Psychology Today quiz to let you know if that can be beneficial is free.
More informally, something that you can do too is what I call like a check-in, like a checkup, essentially. So like a mental health checkup, just like you go to the doctor, hopefully every year for a checkup, like your blood pressure and blood work and all that stuff. Is I'm a very visual person, so I have a little chart on my wall where I have some sections like physical health. What am I doing for my physical health today or this week or right now? Mental health is on there. My spiritual health is on there. Like, what am I doing? Am I praying? Am I going to a religious service? Am I doing something? And I can look at that and see where there are some gaps and recognize that maybe there's a space for me to work in. So for me, when I'm not eating well, my mental health suffers. I have seen that pattern in my life. So if I have a week or two of just eating garbage food and not eating regularly and skipping breakfast, I start to get really anxious. And so for me, that is something I have to be really proactive about. And seeing that for me, like posting something on your fridge, even just a reminder, like, what am I doing today? Even if it's like a 3-minute thing, what am I doing today to address this area of health in my life? That could be something that could be a good place to start too.
Thank you all. Adrienne, you mentioned knowing where you're at and what your triggers are. Barb, during your session overview, you mentioned what some of these triggers are, but what are known triggers for individuals? How does one help coach someone else when they hear triggers?
I'm muted. Can you hear me? Okay. I think it's just kind of that self-awareness. And I always tell my own kids, it can't be everybody else and not you. When everyone starts to make comments or people are saying, God, you're being a little jerk today, or man, you've lost a lot of weight, or you just don't sing. So I think when people start to recognize it, but the triggers in yourself, it's usually self-medication, right? You're drinking more, drugging more, isolating more. I think those are probably the three that I recognize the most in someone else. And the triggers are oftentimes the sleep and just overload of stress. And sometimes you can't stop the stress. And that's why I like that breathing thing, that inhale, exhale. You can do it anywhere, anytime. It literally is 2 minutes. And that might be the time it takes to start your coffee. But I think it's those triggers that you should recognize in a family member, but also we have a responsibility to recognize it in yourself.
I think one thing that I notice first is I hear it first. I hear myself snapping at other people. I hear, my husband, like he's a huffer. He's like, right. And when I hear that, I hear it first. Hear it before I feel it, both in myself and in him. And I think that in the kids that I know, now granted I don't have children, but there are kids around, and they, same thing, you hear it first. And so if you can be in tune to that, I think that's really beneficial as well.
that's funny that she used the word huffing because Adrian, you and I are like, the kids are huffing, huh? Just huffing a little bit and yelling. That's the new word for huffing. That's funny.
I think, you know, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but again, just making sure that you are taking the time and being intentional about recognizing your own stress and your own triggers and your own behaviors and things. And again, those that are around you, because you know, that again, that the list is exhaustive. We see stress in, you know, our emotions. We see it in the way that we talk. We see it in the way we feel, the way that we act. All those different things, different areas. We can see stress, see symptoms of stress, and then that can lead to symptoms of depressions, suicide, etc. So I think as long as, you know, that it's the same as that first step, just making sure that you know what it is for you and what is your family's normal, what in each individual person, what's the normal. Just making sure you're looking for that intentionally is important.
Great, thank you all. So, Barb, did you have something to add?
I was reading that last chat. Is that the one that you asked me? What resources to recommend to participants?
Oh, yes.
Did you answer that?
I was just about to ask it, so you are right on track. So the last question, what resources would you guys recommend to participants struggling themselves or seeing some warning signs from people they care about?
I think Sarah, I think, mentioned Psychology Today is a wonderful start because they have a therapy finder. Definitely the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration, if I'm saying that, SAMCA. That's another place that you can look for treatment centers. But I think that that's kind of, you know, those are your second step. I think initially talking to your doctor is important, which is your primary care doctor, because they can help connect you with local resources. But even taking it a step down, you know, when I was choosing a social media handle, I chose Sow Hope, Grow Hope, because we have this power to create hope in ourselves and hope in other people and make a positive difference in other people. And so, you know, before we think about, you know, with mental health, oh, I need to talk to a therapist, which, by the way, I think everyone needs to talk to a therapist. I really do. They're life-changing. But some of those, you know, some of this is stuff that we can do ourselves too, is knowing those, you know, these techniques that we've been talking about, you know, knowing what different websites are out there, listening to the Egg State of Mind or the Transformation podcast. Those are wonderful podcasts that are all about egg mental health, and just having a friend or family member, one person who is a good listener. I think that is your number one resource, and we are each other's number one resource if we can really be vigilant about knowing those symptoms and signs of stress, and how we can, you know, how we can really listen to each other and, you know, help each other out, you know, give each other a nod. Hey, it's time to go see someone, or hey, maybe we should talk to your doctor, or hey, I'm just here to listen to you, and maybe that's all it takes, you know. But you know, it doesn't always have to go to a counselor. We can all be a friend.
There's a good website called mantherapy.org. It's a little off the wall, but it's definitely for us, like the man's man self-assessment. And then there's also resources. So it's mantherapy.org. I do like the agorability, I think, because they understand it's sort of peer-to-peer, but they're also trained. It's a 1-800-273-TALK. It's a 24-hour crisis line. I caution that just because the calls have been so high. Sometimes there's a half-hour wait, which I'm like, oh my gosh, when somebody's struggling. But that is a national helpline, 1-800-273-TALK. And then the text line, 741-741. And I have to agree with Adriana. Sometimes it's your friends and your family, and we have a responsibility to care for each other. Sometimes when we can't care for ourselves, step up and don't tell people to buck up, but just really step up and be that person that just sits in silence and hears what they have to say. So I would, for suicide, those are the crisis lines. The Man Therapy is just kind of a fun site. Check it out. Just to kind of do a quick assessment of yourself, but, you know, use your resources in your community and use your family. But again, it's time for asking for support from other people and really maintaining not only yourself, your farm, but your family. And you can call me, 781-989-781-5260. I'm not crisis, but we are a resource to connect you to the right people.
Was in the Army, and they used to teach people to say, have a conversation with somebody that allows them or gives them permission to call you on your BS. Okay. So he had that conversation with me. Hey, if you're noticing these signs, I'm okay. Even if at that time I'm really mad or I'm really sad or frustrated or angry, I want you to call me on it. I want you to hold me accountable. And I think having that conversation with a friend or your spouse or a sibling is really important also. And saying, even if I'm mad at the time, I need you to do this for me. If you're seeing these signs, I need you to do it. And having that conversation, it has been a lifesaver for a lot of people, quite literally. And I think that that's really, really key as well.
Great. So as our time is coming to an end, I would like to give one final thank you to all of our panelists. We appreciate you taking time out of your schedules to facilitate your mini session earlier in this series and then helping us wrap up the series with this live panel. Thank you all. Thank you also to everyone who joined and asked questions this evening. We hope that you found it time well spent. Thank you lastly to Kate Teal for all of her work in coordinating and making this possible. Farmers After Hours is a special project of the Michigan Foundation for Agriculture, a 501c3 formed by the Michigan Farm Bureau Board of Directors, with a mission of positively impacting the future of agriculture through leadership and educational programming. Be on the lookout for what's to come. Thank you all again, and have a great evening.